Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Hello students, welcome to today's lecture on economic liberalization and global integration in Indian foreign policy. This is one of the most important transformations in modern Indian history that fundamentally changed both our economy and how we engage with the world. Today we will begin by examining the pre-91 economic model that India followed for decades and understand its limitations. We'll then study the severe economic crisis of 91 that forced India to fundamentally rethink its economic policy, historic 91 economic reforms and their far-reaching consequences. We will also explore how these economic changes profoundly impacted India's foreign policy approach and priorities. End of the Cold War context and collapse of the Soviet Union that created additional pressure for policy change. We will also examine the Look East policy and India's engagement with the East and Southeast Asia. Relations with major powers, including the United States, Russia, and China, will be discussed. The growing importance of economic diplomacy and geoeconomics and India's integration with the global economy will be analyzed. Finally, we will look at contemporary foreign policy and India's current global role. Before 91 reforms, India followed a closed economy. It was heavily influenced by Nehruvian socialist thinking. The economy was characterized by extremely heavy state control and regulation of all economic activity, almost all economic activities. The infamous license Raj system required business to obtain multiple licenses and permission from the government for everything. India followed an import substitution industrialization policy that aimed to produce everything domestically rather than importing. Public sector dominated the economy, with the government owning and running most major industries and infrastructure. Foreign trade was heavily restricted and foreign investment was not encouraged, keeping India largely isolated from global economy. This model was based on the belief that state control was necessary for development and that market forces could not be trusted. While the model had some successes in building basic infrastructure and heavy industries, it also created serious inefficiencies in the system. Understanding the old model is essential to appreciate why reforms became necessary. The pre-91 economic model created numerous serious problems that held back India's economic development and growth. India experienced very low economic growth rates, averaging only around 3.5% annually, mockingly called the Hindu rate of growth. The public sector enterprises that dominated the economy were often grossly inefficient, making losses while enjoying government protection from competition. Absence of competition meant business had no incentive to improve efficiency, quality, or innovate. India fell behind technologically as closed economy policies prevented access to modern foreign technology and management practices. Country remained largely cut off from the rapidly globalizing world economy and international trade. License Raj created massive bureaucratic hurdles, corruption, and opportunities for officials to extract bribes from business. By the late 80s, it was increasingly clear that the old model was not delivering adequate growth or development. The inefficiencies and restrictions were holding India back, while other Asian economies were going much ahead. 1991, India faced most severe economic crisis since independence that threatened the country with complete economic collapse and default. India experienced catastrophic balance of payment crisis, with the country unable to pay for essential imports. Foreign exchange reserves were nearly completely depleted and fell to dangerously low levels. The reserves were sufficient for barely 2 weeks of imports. This was an extremely critical and desperate situation. In this, India was forced to physically pledge its gold reserves to international banks to secure emergency loans and avoid default. The Gulf War in 1991 had increased oil prices dramatically, that severely affected India's import of the oil. Investor confidence collapsed and India's credit rating was downgraded. The crisis was so severe that fundamental and immediate policy changes became unavoidable for survival. The government had no choice but to implement radical reforms. Let us look at the government that faced this crisis. P.V. Narasimha Rao became Prime Minister in June 1991, just as the economic crisis was reaching its peak. He had a minority Congress government that did not have a majority in parliament, making bold reforms politically risky. Rao made the extremely important decision to appoint Dr. Manmohan Singh, a respected economist, as finance minister. Together, Rao and Singh initiated bold and comprehensive economic reforms that would transform India fundamentally. Government pushed through reforms despite facing considerable opposition from within the Congress and outside. The Rao government's 5 years from 1991 to 96 have enormous historical significance for modern India. Narasimha Rao is now recognized as an important reformer, though he was underappreciated during his time. Understanding Rao's leadership is important because he took enormous political risk to push the reforms, and Manmohan Singh, as finance minister, would be the chief architect. 1991 economic reforms represented a fundamental break from decades of socialist economic policies and state control. There was comprehensive liberalization, removing government controls and allowing market forces greater role in the economy. License Raj was dismantled, freeing business from bureaucratic control. Privatization of government-owned public sector enterprises was started, though implemented gradually and selectively. Globalization of the Indian economy was embraced through opening up to international trade and investment. Foreign direct investment, previously severely restricted, was now actively welcomed in most sectors with raised limits. Trade barriers, including high import tariffs, were substantially reduced to integrate India with world economy or the global economy. These reforms collectively represented the most significant economic policy shift since independence in 1947. Manmohan Singh, as finance minister, led the reform implementation. Dr. Manmohan Singh was the principal architect and implementer of the historic 91 economic reforms. He brought impressive credentials as a trained economist with a doctorate from Oxford University. Singh also had extensive international experience, having worked with various international economic organizations. In July 1991, he presented a historic budget to Parliament that laid out the comprehensive reform program. In his budget speech, he quoted Victor Hugo, saying, "No power on earth can stop an idea whose time has come." Despite severe criticism and opposition, Singh successfully implemented the difficult and controversial reforms. 1991 reforms included several specific and concrete measures that fundamentally changed how the Indian economy operated. Industrial licensing was abolished, except for few sensitive industries, freeing business from bureaucratic control. Limits on foreign direct investments were substantially raised, and many sectors were opened to foreign companies. The Indian rupee was made partially convertible on current account, making international trade and investment easier. Import tariffs that had been prohibitively high were reduced. Monopolies enjoyed by public sector enterprises in many industries were ended, introducing competition. The financial sector, included banks and capital markets, was liberalized, though this happened gradually over time. These specific measures collectively transformed India from a closed, controlled economy to a more open market economy. Of course, implementation was gradual rather than sudden. allowing adjustment of time. 1991 economic reforms happened in the context of monumental global changes with the end of Cold War. Soviet Union, which had existed since 1917, collapsed completely and dissolved in December 91. Cold War that had defined global politics for over 4 decades came to an abrupt end. The bipolar world with two competing superpowers suddenly collapsed. It became a unipolar world. The United States emerged as the sole remaining superpower with unmatched military and economic power globally. India suddenly lost the Soviet Union, which had been its most important strategic and economic partner and a major ally for decades. These enormous global changes required India to fundamentally adjust and rethink its foreign policy approach and alignments. Understanding this global context is crucial because domestic and international factors combined to push reforms. Domestic factors immensely impact our foreign policy choices also. Collapse of Soviet Union had profound and far-reaching security and economic implications for India, for we lost our most reliable partner in defense matters and major supplier of military equipments. The extensive economic cooperation was suddenly disrupted. Rupee-ruble trade agreements that had facilitated bilateral trade completely broke down. India lost the crucial diplomatic support in the United Nations Security Council that the Soviet veto had provided. Special relationship with Moscow that had lasted decades and provided strategic balance was suddenly gone. These multiple losses forced India to urgently diversify its international relationship and not to depend heavily on a single partner. Russia, which succeeded the Soviet Union, remained friendly but was much weaker and less important economically. This strategic vacuum created by Soviet collapse made India's situation more vulnerable and uncertain. Non-alignment had lost its Cold War context. Now, this all shows why India had to rethink its entire foreign policy approach fundamentally. End of Cold War meant that the policy of non-alignment as originally conceived lost its basic logic and rationale. Non-alignment had been without avoiding entanglement with either the American or Soviet blocs. Now, with only one superpower, no blocs to avoid, and therefore the original purpose was lost. Policy was reinterpreted to emphasize strategic autonomy and independence in foreign policy decision making. Now, economic interests and development priorities gained a much greater importance relative to purely ideological or purely political consideration. India became more pragmatic, flexible, and willing to adjust policies based on changing circumstances and national interest. Let us examine the link that sees how Indian foreign policy finally evolved against this particular background. After 1991, economic interests and considerations became absolutely central to Indian foreign policy in unprecedented ways. Trade promotion, market access, and export growth became major priorities in bilateral relations with countries worldwide. Attracting foreign investment to support economic growth became an important objective of diplomatic engagement. Access to advanced technology and know-how from developed countries became crucial for India's development aspirations. Economic diplomacy, meaning using diplomatic channels to promote economic interests, was heavily emphasized. Foreign policy increasingly came to be seen as needing to support and facilitate economic growth and development. Now, economic reforms enabled new regional engagements. Look East policy initiated by Prime Minister Narasimha Rao in 91 represented major reorientation towards East and Southeast Asia. The policy signaled India's intention to focus much greater attention on the dynamic economies of East and Southeast Asia. Economic engagements with the ASEAN became a central priority. This represented reversal of decades of relative neglect of this important neighboring region by Indian foreign policy. The policy recognized the crucial importance of rapidly growing Asian economies and India's need to integrate economically. The Look East policy had both significant economic dimensions in trade and investment as well as strategic security dimensions. India sought to learn from the successful development models of East Asian tiger economies. Policy aimed to position India as part of the broader Asian economic dynamism rather than isolated. Understanding Look East policy's origin show India's new pragmatic, economically focused approach. Engagement with ASEAN was now central. India's engagement with ASEAN deepened progressively through the 90s and 2000s with increasing levels of institutionalized cooperation. India became a sectoral dialogue partner of ASEAN in 1992, just 1 year after Look East policy began. The partnership was upgraded to full dialogue partnership status in 1996, giving India greater role in ASEAN deliberation. India became a member of the ASEAN Regional Forum, the organization's main security dialogue platform. The relationship was elevated to summit level in 2002, allowing annual meetings between Indian Prime Minister and ASEAN leaders. Trade between India and ASEAN countries grew substantially as economic ties deepened. Investment flows in both directions increased, with ASEAN companies investing in India and vice versa. Well, understanding ASEAN engagement is crucial as it remains central to India's regional policy. Beyond ASEAN, India also significantly enhanced its bilateral relation with major East Asian countries. Relations with Japan, which had been somewhat limited earlier, was substantially strengthened across economic and strategic dimensions. India improved relations with South Korea, developing important economic cooperation, particularly in technology and manufacturing sector. Economic cooperation was heavily emphasized with all these countries as trade and investment grew substantially. Technology was supplied by Japan and Korea, helping India access advanced manufacturing and electronics know-how. Cultural exchange with East Asian countries increased significantly, promoting better mutual understanding. On some strategic and security issues, particularly regarding China, there were growing convergence of interest and concern. Understanding these bilateral relationships shows India building diverse partnership in economically dynamic regions. Economic reforms also transformed relations with the West. India's relation with USA, which had been difficult during the Cold War, began significantly improving. India's economic reforms and move towards market economy created important common ground and shared interests. Collaboration in the rapidly growing technology sector, particularly IT, brought the two countries closer. Increasingly influential and successful Indian diaspora in America began actively advocating for strong Indo-US relations. Strategic dialogue between two countries intensified. The relationship gradually moved away from suspicion and distance to confidence and long-term partnership. Well, this transformation is crucial because US-India relationship became increasingly important, but significant challenges remained. Despite improving relations, India and US faced several significant challenges and sources of friction. Nuclear issue remained highly problematic, with the US opposing India's nuclear weapons program. American sanctions were imposed after India conducted nuclear tests in 1998, causing temporary setback. Pakistan factor continued to complicate Indo-US relation even in the post-Cold War era. The two countries took different positions on various global issues, including climate change and international trade. Trade disputes occurred periodically over market access, intellectual property, and various economic issues. The relationship, while improving, remained quite complex, with cooperation and friction existing simultaneously. Well, in understanding these obstacles shows that relationship was not simple despite overall improvements. As far as Russia is concerned, which became the successor of Soviet Union, it inherited a special relationship, but circumstances had fundamentally changed. India tried to make friendly relations with the new Russian Federation. Defense cooperation continued with Russia, remaining India's largest supplier of military equipment and with technology. In 2000, India-Russia declared a strategic partnership, formalizing the close relationship. However, economic ties were far less important than they had been during the Soviet era. Russia's own economic problems in the 90s limited its ability to provide any economic assistance to India. India was careful to maintain good ties with Russia while simultaneously building up a new partnership with US and other countries. Now, we see that one can see continuity, but also significant evolution and adaptation in Indo-Russian relationship. India's relation with China, hostile since 1962, began a slow and gradual process of improvement. PM Rajiv Gandhi's groundbreaking visit to China in 98 marked the beginning of normalization after decades. Border negotiations were initiated and efforts were made that even if the border disputes remain unresolved, China and India can go ahead with improved economic ties and bilateral trade and investment plans. And China gradually became one of India's largest trading partners with rapidly growing bilateral economic ties. China's close ties with Pakistan, of course, remain a major concern and a source of friction for India. In May 98, India conducted a series of nuclear tests known as Pokhran-2 that dramatically changed the strategic landscape. 5 nuclear devices were tested on May 13, 1998 at the Pokhran test site in Rajasthan. India openly declared itself a nuclear weapon state, ending decades of ambiguity about its nuclear status. Pakistan responded by conducting its own nuclear test just weeks later, establishing overt nuclear rivalry. The international community, led by United States, imposed economic and technology sanctions on India. The tests were conducted by the BJP-led government of Prime Minister Atal Bihari Vajpayee. Domestically in India, there was overwhelming public support for the test across political spectrum. The test fundamentally changed India's strategic position and its relationship with the major powers. Understanding 1998 test is crucial as they were watershed movements in India's strategic policy. 98 nuclear test had far-reaching consequences for India's security, diplomacy, and international standing. India was now an openly declared nuclear weapons state with demonstrated capability. Economic and technology sanctions were imposed by US and other countries, creating diplomatic challenges. However, domestic support was immense, very strong. Indian diplomacy had to work hard to manage the international fallouts and minimize damage from sanctions. Interestingly, the test eventually contributed to improved Indo-US relations after initial tensions. The test enhanced India's strategic credibility and deterrent capability against potential threats. India positioned itself as a responsible nuclear power committed to no first use policy. Early 1999, Pakistan infiltrated troops into the Kargil sector of Kashmir, triggering a major military conflict. Pakistan forces occupied strategic heights on the Indian side of the line of control in Kashmir. India launched major military operations to evict the infiltrators from our territory. Fighting lasted for several weeks during summer 1999 with significant casualties on both the sides. International opinion, including importantly the United States, supported India and pressured Pakistan to withdraw. Pakistan was forced to withdraw its forces under intense diplomatic pressure and military setback. The conflict was a military and diplomatic success for India, demonstrating improved capabilities since 1971. After 91, economic considerations and commercial interests became absolutely central to Indian foreign policy in ways unprecedented before. Trade promotion and helping Indian companies export and access foreign markets became major diplomatic priorities. Attracting foreign investment to India became an important objective that emphasizes and diplomats actively pursued. Securing access to advanced technology through bilateral cooperation agreements became crucial for development. Negotiating market access and reducing trade barriers in other countries was emphasized in bilateral discussions. The large and increasingly successful Indian diaspora abroad was engaged much more actively as economic asset. Economic diplomacy, using diplomatic channels and high-level visits to promote economic interests was heavily emphasized, and this represented a major shift from earlier period when economic issues were secondary to political considerations. Well, Indian diaspora, meaning Indians living abroad, became an increasingly important factor in Indian foreign policy. There's a very large Indian diaspora spread across the world, numbering in tens of millions globally. The diaspora is particularly large and influential in the United States, where Indians have been very successful. Indians became prominent in the American technology sector, including Silicon Valley, gaining significant economic influence. The diaspora increasingly advocated for improved Indo-US relations and lobbied the American government. Economic links between diaspora communities and India grew substantially with investments and remittances flowing. Diaspora became a significant soft power asset for India, improving the country's image abroad. Government began engaging the diaspora more actively through special events and programs. Information technology sector grew explosively in India during 1990s, transforming the economy and India's global image. India rapidly emerged as a major global hub for software development and IT services. The Y2K problem, where computer systems needed updating for the year 2000, created enormous opportunities for Indian IT companies. Bangalore in Karnataka emerged as India's Silicon Valley and became globally recognized as major technology center. The IT boom completely changed how the world viewed India, from poor developing country to technology power. The sector created significant economic benefits through exports, employment, and attracting foreign investments. IT success also had important diplomatic benefits by giving India prestige and influence in technology matters. Indian IT professionals became highly sought after globally, particularly in the United States. India was a founding member of the World Trade Organization when it was established in 1995. The WTO replaced the older GATT system, General Agreement on Tariff and Trade System, and created a more comprehensive framework for global trade. India participated actively in WTO negotiations, defending developing countries' interests alongside other nations. The Doha round of trade negotiations launched in 2001 saw India playing prominent role. Agriculture and services became particular focus areas where India had strong interests and concerns. India worked to ensure WTO rules protected developing countries from unfair pressure by developed nations. Integration with the global trading system accelerated as India reduced tariffs and open markets. India's growing economic weightage gave it greater voice and influence in global trade negotiations. Understanding India's WTO engagement shows increasing integration with global economic governance. India pursued regional economic integration through, though with mixed success in different forums. South Asian Association for Regional Cooperation, known as SAARC, remained limited due to Indo-Pak tensions and because of a fierce psychosis amongst small countries. South Asian countries regarding India's big brotherly attitude. They were perhaps afraid of India's economic and military might, and therefore SAARC could not be very successful. The Bay of Bengal Initiative for Multi-Sectoral Technical and Economic Cooperation, called BIMSTEC, was initiated in 1997. BIMSTEC linked South Asia and Southeast Asian countries and became increasingly important for India. India signed various free trade agreements with the different countries to promote regional economic integration. Economic cooperation in South Asia remained limited but showed some gradual improvement over time. The Look East policy included efforts to integrate into regional value chains and production networks. Regional integration was seen as important for promoting trade, investment, and economic growth. As India's economy grew rapidly after liberalization, energy security became an increasingly critical foreign policy concern. India's growing economy required a massive amount of energy, particularly petroleum and natural gas. Oil imports increased substantially as domestic production could not meet growing demands. Energy security, meaning reliable access to energy at reasonable prices, became major strategic priority. Relations with oil-producing countries in the Persian Gulf region became extremely important for ensuring supplies. India worked to diversify energy sources and suppliers to reduce dependence on any single region. Strategic petroleum reserves were created to provide buffer against supply disruptions. Energy considerations influenced diplomatic relations with the countries across the Middle East, Central Asia, Africa, and Latin America. Understanding energy security concerns is crucial for seeing important driver of modern foreign policy. Gulf countries were particularly important. Let us examine those relations. The Persian Gulf region became extremely important for India for multiple interconnected economic and strategic reasons. The Gulf states are the major source of India's crude oil imports, which are essential for the economy. A very large Indian workforce, numbering in millions, work in Gulf countries, sending substantial remittances home. These remittances from Gulf workers are a major source of foreign exchange for India. The strategic importance of ensuring stability in the Gulf region and protecting Indian interests there increased. India carefully maintained balanced approach in Gulf politics, maintaining good relations with the rival countries. India avoided taking sides in regional conflicts or rivalries among Gulf states. The growing economic interdependence made Gulf relations critically important to Indian foreign policy. Understanding Gulf relations shows how energy dependence shapes diplomatic priorities. Environmental issues also gained importance. Climate change emerged as a major global issue during this period, requiring India's diplomatic attention. India participated in international climate change negotiations, including the important Kyoto Protocol. The Kyoto Protocol was signed in 1997 and committed developed countries to reducing greenhouse gas emissions. India insisted on the principle of common but differentiated responsibilities, CBDR, in climate negotiation, which was accepted as a doctrine in Rio summit. This principle meant developed countries should take primary responsibility for emission reduction. India had to balance its development needs with growing international pressure to limit emissions. Defending the rights of developing countries to grow and develop remained important Indian position. India argued that poverty reduction and development must not be sacrificed for environmental goals. Understanding India's climate position shows a tension between development imperative and environmental concern. Terrorism became another major concern. Let us examine security cooperation. India faced significant terrorism problems, particularly cross-border terrorism from Pakistan after Pakistan faced defeat in the conventional warfare in 65 and again in 71. Pakistan-based terrorist groups operating in Kashmir became major security concern and foreign policy challenge. The September 11, 2001 terrorist attack in America fundamentally changed the global context for counter-terrorism operations. After 9/11, international focus on terrorism increased dramatically, creating opportunities for India-US cooperation as both were victims of serious-scale terrorism. Counter-terrorism cooperation with the United States and other countries increased substantially. Intelligence sharing on terrorist threats became an important dimension of security partnership. India worked to highlight Pakistan's support for terrorism and sought international pressure on Pakistan. Security concerns became important elements of foreign policy alongside traditional diplomatic and economic issues. Well, understanding terrorism impact shows how security threats shape diplomatic priorities and partnership. India-Pakistan relations remained tense and difficult throughout the 90s and 2000s despite occasional dialogue attempts. Fundamental Kashmir dispute continued to position bilateral relations between the two countries. Both countries conducted nuclear tests in 98, establishing overt nuclear rivalry and raising stakes. Kargil conflict in 1999 brought the two countries to brink of full-scale war. Agra summit in 2001 between Vajpayee and Musharraf failed to achieve breakthrough on Kashmir. There were periodic attempts at dialogue and peace processes, but progress remained extremely limited. Terrorist attacks launched from Pakistan territory repeatedly derailed peace efforts and negotiations. On December 13, 2001, terrorists attacked the Indian Parliament in New Delhi in a shocking assault. The attack occurred just 3 months after the September 11 attack in America. Assault on Parliament, symbol of Indian democracy, created a major crisis in Indian-Pak relations. India accused Pakistan-based terrorist groups of carrying out the attack with Pakistan's support. India launched Operation Parakram, mobilizing massive military forces along the Pakistan border. The military mobilization lasted for several months with the tensions extremely high and war threatened. International mediation, particularly by the United States, helped prevent escalation to full-scale warfare. But the crisis showed how terrorism could push nuclear-armed rivals to brink of conflict. India and Pakistan resumed comprehensive bilateral dialogues in 2004 after the tension from Parliament attack subsided. The composite dialogue covered all outstanding issues between the two countries, including Kashmir. Back-channel negotiations on Kashmir were conducted secretly between special representatives. Some limited progress was made on reducing tensions and building confidence between the two sides. Confidence-building measures were implemented, including transport links and people-to-people contacts, people-to-people diplomacy. However, the fundamental Kashmir dispute remained unresolved despite extensive negotiation. The Mumbai terrorist attacks in November 2008 killed this dialogue process once again. The attacks showed how terrorism repeatedly derailed peace efforts between the two countries. Understanding the composite dialogue shows both possibilities and severe limitations of Indo-Pak peace processes. The nuclear deal with US was a major achievement. India-US Civil Nuclear Cooperation Agreement announced in 2005 was truly historic and transformative. The deal was a joint narrative by PM Manmohan Singh and President George W. Bush. The agreement required India to separate its civilian and military nuclear program and accept safeguards. India agreed to place its civilian nuclear facilities under International Atomic Energy Agency safeguards and inspection. The Nuclear Suppliers Group, a 48-nation organization, had to grant India a special waiver in 2008. The agreement was controversial in India, with the critics arguing it compromised India's nuclear weapons program. The deal required approved by Indian Parliament, where it faced strong opposition but ultimately passed. The agreement fundamentally transformed India-US relations and ended India's nuclear isolation. So understanding the nuclear deal is crucial because it was a watershed in Indo-US partnership. The deal had multiple important implications, and let us examine its significance. Indo-US civil nuclear agreement had profound and far-reaching significance for India's international position. The deal ended decades of India's isolation from international nuclear commerce and cooperation. It provided de facto recognition of India as a responsible nuclear weapons state despite not signing NPT. India gained access to civilian nuclear technology, fuel and reactors from international suppliers. The deal represented a strategic partnership with the US going far beyond the specific nuclear issue. For India, energy security, nuclear power could now contribute more significantly to meeting growing electricity needs. However, the agreement was highly controversial domestically, with critics arguing it constrained India's weapon program. The left parties that supported the government opposed the deal, nearly bringing down the government. Understanding the deal's significance shows importance, but also domestic political cost. Look East policy was formally renamed and upgraded to Act East policy in 2014 by PM Modi. The new name signaled a more proactive and action-oriented approach towards East and Southeast Asia. Infrastructure connectivity projects linking India to Southeast Asia were given greater priority and focus. Security cooperation with ASEAN and East Asian countries increased substantially beyond just economic engagement. The policy maintained ASEAN centrality, meaning ASEAN remained core of India's Eastern engagement. The geographic scope was extended beyond Southeast Asia to include the Pacific region. Act East represented continuity with Look East, but with greater emphasis on implementation and results. The evolution showed sustained bipartisan commitment to Asian engagements across different governments. Understanding Act East shows how policy evolved while maintaining core focus on the region. Indo-Pacific concept became important. Let us examine this framework. India enthusiastically embraced the Indo-Pacific framework for understanding regional strategic geography and dynamics. The Indo-Pacific concept replaced the older Asia-Pacific terminology by explicitly including India. This geographic framing recognized and emphasized India's important strategic role in regional affairs. The concept has strong maritime security emphasis, given the strategic importance of Indian and Pacific Oceans. India advocates for a free and open Indo-Pacific with rules-based order and respect for international law. The framework reflected growing convergence between India, US, Japan, and Australia on regional security. The Quadrilateral Security Dialogue, known as Quad, was revived to coordinate Indo-Pacific strategies. Understanding Indo-Pacific concept is crucial for seeing how India views its regional strategic environment. Quad deserves particular attention. Let us examine that grouping. Quadrilateral Security Dialogue, commonly known as Quad, links India, US, Japan, and Australia. The grouping was initially proposed by Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe in 2007 for security coordination. Quad was briefly suspended due to concerns about Chinese reactions, but was revived in 2017. The revived Quad has focused on security cooperation in the Indo-Pacific region. The four countries share concern about China's growing assertiveness and behavior in the region. However, Quad is not a formal military alliance, but rather strategic consultation mechanism. India has been careful to emphasize Quad is not directed against any specific country. Understanding Quad shows India building strategic partnership while maintaining flexibility. Neighborhood policy also remained important, and let us examine that focus. Neighborhood First policy announced by Modi government in 2014 emphasized priority to South Asian neighbors. SAARC remained important forum, but not very effective in the light of Indo-Pak tension. After terrorist attack in 2016, India boycotted SAARC summit and subsequently reduced emphasis on it. BIMSTEC was given preference over SAARC as alternative regional cooperation platform. Development partnership with the smaller neighbors through infrastructure and capacity building projects were emphasized. Connectivity projects to improve physical links with the neighboring countries were prioritized. The policy had mixed success, with some neighbors appreciating Indian assistance while others remained concerned about Indian dominance, big brotherly attitude. Understanding neighborhood first shows India's continued focus on South Asia despite global ambition. China still remains a major challenge. China's rapid rise as a global power presented India with its most significant long-term strategic challenge. Border tensions continued with occasional military standoffs in disputed areas. Economic competition between the two Asian giants intensified as both sought influence and markets. China's Belt and Road Initiative raised concerns in India about strategic encirclement and debt diplomacy. Strategic rivalry between India and China intensified across South Asia, Indian Ocean, and globally. China's close strategic partnership with Pakistan remained a major friction in Indo-China relations. India had to carefully balance economic engagement with China against strategic competition and rivalry. Managing the China relationship becomes a central preoccupation of Indian foreign and security policy. Well, understanding the China challenge is crucial as it significantly shapes India's strategic choices. India's rapid economic growth after liberalization significantly enhanced its global weight and influence. India consistently ranked among the fastest growing major economies in the world during 2000s and 2010s decade. By 2019, India had become the world's fifth largest economy by nominal GDP. The growing economic weight gave India much greater voice and influence in global economic governance. India was a founding member of the G20 forum when it was elevated to leaders levels. India's aspiration for permanent membership in UN Security Council gained greater credibility. We need to understand the link between economic growth and global role, which is something essential. India also developed considerable soft power. India invested considerably in projecting soft power through culture, values, and lifestyle globally. Yoga and Ayurveda, traditional Indian practices, were actively promoted worldwide as India's cultural exports. International Yoga Day was established by the United Nations in 2014 with Indian initiative and global support. Indian culture, including music, dance, cuisine, and spirituality, gained increasing global popularity. Bollywood, India's film industry, reached audiences across the world, enhancing India's cultural influence. Dimension of India's Indian influence beyond technology remained important area. Launched in 2015, aimed to transform India into India's IT sector, maintained global leadership sourcing. A vibrant startup ecosystem emerged, making India third largest startup hub. Technology diplomacy became important with India engaging on issues like cybersecurity and data governance. Cybersecurity concerns grew as India faced increasing threats from state and non-state actors. Integration with the global digital economy accelerated with e-commerce and digital service growing rapidly. Understanding technology's role shows how digital transformation affects both the domestic policy and foreign relations. While globalization brought significant benefits, it also created serious challenges that required policy attention. Benefits were distributed quite unevenly. Income inequality increased, job displacement occurred, agricultural sector faced particular challenges. India had to carefully balance maintaining openness to global economy with protecting vulnerable sectors. Managing the social and political costs of globalization became important policy challenge. Understanding these challenges shows globalization is complex with the costs as well as benefits. Core principles showed both continuity and change. Indian foreign policy after 91 showed interesting combination of fundamental changes and important continuities. Strategic autonomy was retained. Multi-alignment in practice replaced non-alignment, while independence remained goal. Greater pragmatism and flexibility characterized the foreign policy as compared to rigid earlier approaches. Economic consideration became absolutely central in unprecedented ways. India adopted more assertive stance regionally and globally compared to more cautious earlier approach. However, core principles like sovereignty, peaceful coexistence, and multilateralism were adopted, not abandoned. Understanding this balance of change and continuity is important for policy evolution. Contemporary approach reflects these changes. Contemporary Indian foreign policy is characterized by several distinctive features. India forms issue-based coalitions rather than permanent alliances. Maintaining flexibility, partnerships are built pragmatically based on converging interests on specific issues. Economic interests remain a priority, but not to the exclusion of security and strategic concerns. Security concerns, including terrorism, China challenge, and maritime security, are prominent. India maintains both regional engagements in South Asia and global engagement on multiple issues. The approach is assertive in defending interests while avoiding formal alignments. Understanding contemporary approach shows sophisticated balancing of multiple interests and relationships. India has growing global aspirations. India has clear aspirations to be recognized as major power with greater voice in global governance. Permanent membership in UN Security Council, India's greater representation and voice in international financial institutions like IMF and World Bank. India positions itself as a leader of developing world and voice of global south. Reform of international institutions to reflect contemporary power realities is consistently advocated. India's preference for multipolar world order rather than hegemony by single power. Growing economic weight and military capabilities support these global aspirations. Understanding these aspirations show India's self-perception and goal in international system. The overall impact of economic integration was profound. Economic liberalization and global integration fundamentally transformed Indian foreign policy in multiple profound ways. Economic reforms opened India to the world and integrated it into global economy. Foreign policy priorities expanded beyond traditional political and security issues. India's enhanced international standing resulted from economic growth and increase in global weightage. Partnerships become more diverse, with India engaging with wide range of countries. A more pragmatic and flexible approach replaced earlier more ideological positions. Economic diplomacy, focusing on trade, investment, and technology, became central to foreign policy. Understanding this transformation is essential for appreciating modern Indian foreign policy. Let us conclude. The year 1991 marked a watershed movement in Indian history when severe economic crisis forced fundamental reforms. Economic liberalization initiated by Narasimha Rao and Manmohan Singh transformed India's economy. Economic transformation changed India's foreign policy priorities, approach, and international relationship. Global integration made India a significant player in world economy. India emerged as one of world's major economies with the growing global influence. Contemporary Indian foreign policy balances economic interests, security concerns, and political objectives. Well, the strategic autonomy principle persists while the policies are pragmatically adopted. Understanding this period is crucial because it shaped the India we see today globally. The economic liberalization revolution continues to influence Indian foreign policy. Thank you.
I am Dr. Amar Kumar Behra, currently an associate professor in the Department of Design at the Indian Institute of Technology, Kanpur. So, this course is designed to introduce learners to the core principles of Industry 4.0, smart factories, cyber physical systems, big data, AI ML applications, and the industrial Internet of Things. We combine theory with real world case studies, digital twin demonstrations, and examples from manufacturing and healthcare sectors. Learners can expect to gain both conceptual clarity and practical insights, preparing them to design, innovate, and deploy Industry 4.0 solutions in real industrial settings. It is ideal for students and professionals in design, mechanical engineering, manufacturing, mechatronics, and computer science, or anyone curious about the future of smart, connected industries. Swayam Prabha is a remarkable initiative by the Ministry of Education. It brings high quality, curriculum based content to millions of learners across India, free of cost. Just visit www.swayamprabha.gov.in. Then scroll down and click on Higher Education, and from there you can access the various channels and explore courses on Swayam Prabha channels. What excites me most is the inclusivity. Whether you are in a metro city or a remote village, you get equal access to world-class lectures, which is a true democratization of education.
Namaskar ji, मैं Professor Dr. Aman Amrit Cheema. I'm working as a Director and Professor Laws at Punjab University Chandigarh's Regional Campus, Ludhiana. Property law is such a subject which caters to day-to-day needs of the individuals. We see that normal public is always in the process of transacting for the sale, for the mortgage, for the gift, for the lease of various immovable properties. So this course is not only a value-added course, but it is skill development course also. It's a course which is accessible to anyone and any person. He could be of general public, or he could be doing LLB or BA LLB course or any LLM course also. We need to visit www.swayamprabha.gov.in, and in the top box we need to scroll down to higher education, and from there we have various channels which are related to IIT Kanpur. You can access all kind of higher education courses in the scheme. The point of consideration over here is that this feature of Swayam Prabha not only caters to the higher education, it caters to the competitive examinations also.